Ugh, okay. Let's do Carmilla. I think this is like it's more like a visual novel, but whatever. Oh, I can make it transparent. Text speed to medium. Auto text? Is that like a Wordle? Okay. Enter, advances dialogue, space advances dialogue, arrow key, navigate the interface, escape, accesses the menu, control skips dialogue while held down, tab toggles dialogue skipping, page up rolls back to earlier. Okay, so page up and down. If I accidentally hit it too fast and miss something, I can go back. I'm gonna put the auto text delay on long because I don't want it to like keep going. S takes a screenshot. V toggles assertive self-voicing. Oh, it opened up something. It closed it. Assistive self-voicing. Oh, okay. Alright, so that's like if you needed to voice itself, okay. It opened up my web browser. Let me close that again. Alright. Start. Editor's introduction. Visual, adjective. Attained or maintained by sight, visual impressions, producing mental images, vivid. Gothic, adjective, pejorative. Barbaric, lacking refined taste, the vulgar. Ada. The first time I met Dr. Hesselius was in exile, although his was a self-imposed one. A practicing surgeon at the time, he was dissatisfied with the materialistic worldview governing his profession, and therefore decided to take an infinite break. I, on the other hand, had recently been expelled from the Covenant of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, and thus forced to abandon my novitiate. Although, I must admit, the punishment was an appropriate one, and meant that I lost not only my home, but also my calling. I haven't been quite focused ever since, and never stayed in one place for more than a few weeks. Trying to close something up. There we go. In the doctor, I found my master. We quickly bonded over our shared interests in the metaphysical and the works of Swedenborg. His knowledge was immense, his grasp of difficult ideas immensely intuitive. He was the very man to inspire a young enthusiast like me with awe and delight. Sounds kind of like a creep, if you ask me. My admiration has stood the test of time and separation of space. I am sure it is well founded. After returning to his profession, Dr. Hesselius made it a point to seek out those cases which showed the least likelihood of rewarding inquiry, in hopes of furthering his theories about the relationship between the natural and the spiritual world. Often during his investigations, he would come across cases that seemed to scratch at the cloudy glass separating the two worlds. His artful documentation of these cases would be forwarded to me so I could translate and edit them for presentation to an interested laity. Thus, Visual Gothic was born. It is named after the duality that is inherent in the two definitions of visual cited earlier, namely sensory perception and imagination, or the tangible and the intangible. Gothic to us stands for a shameless artistic freedom that disregards historical accuracy, established standards, or, God beware, refined taste in favor of affect. I have appended a small collection of notes that might provide further information on a variety of terms and subjects. You can right-click the mouse or hit the escape button at any time for help and further options. Alright? The manuscripts which are forwarded to me by Dr. Hesselius are written some in English, some in French, but the greater part in German. I am a faithful, though by no means a graceful translator, and although here and there I omit some passages, shorten others, and disguise names, I have interpolated nothing. The first case we shall present to you is not without educational merits. Although not Gothic in its strictest sense, it presents a fine starting point for further exploration of the genre. The story may serve as a warning, not against the dangers of unrestrained flights of fancy, but against blind rationalism. The manuscript came with the following note attached to it. Dear Ada, as I forwarded this case to you, I shall forestall the intelligent lady who relates it in nothing. I have therefore determined to abstain from any of my usual reasoning. Suffice to say that I believe the attached manuscript, which has its foundation in truth and nature, involves some of the profoundest arcana of our dual existence and its intermediates. Your humble servant, Martin Hesselius. Since Dr. Hesselius is withholding his usual reasoning, allow me to introduce Laura, the protagonist and narrator of our first case. Laura is undoubtedly an intelligent lady, yet, as we will repeatedly point out, she is more than that. She's rational. Despite her provincial residence, she is no victim of superstitious folklore beliefs. And although her assurances in this regard might seem redundant at times, they serve no other purpose than to convince you, dear skeptical reader, that she is a reliable source and her testament nothing but the truth. So it's like the classic creepypasta, I never believed in ghosts, but once this happened. A word of warning. At times, you might be tempted to laugh at the people in this story and their inability to see what's right in front of them. Laura lives at the height of the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment, and the belief that all the world's mysteries would soon be solved is still widespread. The scientific disillusionment from which Dr. Hesselius suffers has not spread to the remote region Laura calls her home. Fairy tales and mythology can no longer serve to explain the world's many mysteries, and science has not filled those gaps. Laura is adept at employing strictly scientific methods to deduce those parts of the narration she has not witnessed herself. I have taken the liberty to omit her numerous references to relevant scientific literature. Yet, as more and more inexplicable occurrences present themselves, she is caught in a bind between her rational belief system and her emotions. With all the progress and benefits that the Age of Enlightenment has brought about, Laura's tale encourages us to ask whether we might have lost something valuable in the process. Science is, of course, merely one of the many lenses through which we may choose to perceive the world. Rationalism or atheism can easily turn into quasi-religions as they replace previous belief systems within the human psyche. Ain't that the truth? Chapter 1. Guest. Hold on, I gotta blow my nose. Although we are by no means magnificent people, in Styria we inhabit a castle, or schloss. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. Scantily enough ours would have answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, and I bear an English name, although I never saw England. But here, in this lonely and primitive place where everything is so marvelously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all materially add to our comforts, or even luxuries. My father was in the Austrian service when he purchased this feudal residence and the small estate on which it stands, a bargain. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its bridge. It was never raised in my time. Its moat is full of branches and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface are white fleets of water lilies. Over all this, the Schloss shows its many windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. Well, that's beautiful. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether I say the truth. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the left. The nearest inhabited schloss of any historic associations is that of old General Spielsdorf, nearly 20 miles away to the right. I have said the nearest inhabited village because there is, only 3 miles westward, that is to say the direction of General Spielsdorf Schloss, a ruined village. It has a quaint little church, now roofless, in the aisle of which are the mouldering tombs of the once proud family of Karnstein, now extinct. It was they who once owned the equally desolate chateau which, in the thick of the forest, overlooks the silent ruins of the town. Spooky. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I don't include servants or those dependents who occupy rooms in the buildings attached to the Schloss. Listen and wonder. My father, who is the kindest man on earth, and I, at the date of my story only 19, constitute the family at the Schloss. That is a pretty small family there. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess who has been with me from my infancy. I could not remember the time when her kind, benevolent face was not a familiar picture in my memory. Ah, this was Madame Perrodon, a native of Bern, whose care and good nature now in part supplied to me the loss of my mother, whom I do not even remember, so early I lost her. She made a third at our little dinner party. Ah, there was a fourth. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, a lady such as you term, I believe, a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French and broken English, to which my father and I added English. The latter, partly to prevent its becoming a lost language among us, and partly from patriotic motives, we spoke every day. The consequence was a babble at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. Yeah, I hear that like bilingual people or like trilingual people would just sort of shift between languages based on what language is better used to convey like the tone they're looking for. So that's cute. Besides, there were 2 or 3 young lady friends, pretty nearly of my own age, who were occasional visitors for longer or shorter terms, and these visits I sometimes returned. These were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from neighbors of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, a rather solitary one, I can assure you. She looks annoyed by that. My governante had just so much control over me, as you might conjecture such sage persons would have in the case of a rather spoiled girl, whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. The first occurrence in my existence which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which in fact never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. Some people will think it so trifling that it should not be recorded here. You will see, however, by and by, why I mention it. The nursery, as it was called, though I had it all to myself, was a large room in the upper story of the castle, with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old when one night I awoke and, looking around the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories or fairy tales. Of all such lore makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flicker of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall, nearer to our faces. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, as I conceived, neglected, and I began to whimper, preparatory to a hearty bout of roaring, when, to my surprise, I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. It was that of a girl who was kneeling, with her hands on the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The girl started back with her eyes fixed on me, and then slipped down upon the floor, and, as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened, and I yelled with all my might and main. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper all came running in, and hearing my story, they made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But, child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale with an unwanted look of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room, and peep under the tables, and pluck open cupboards. I must have been thinking it was a wild animal or something. Then the housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not, the place is still warm." I remember the nursery maid petting me and all three examining my chest, where I told them I felt the puncture, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the two other servants who were in charge of the nursery remained sitting up all night. From that time on, a servant always sat up in the nursery until I was about 14. Dang. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A doctor was called in. He was pallid and elderly. For a good while, every second day, he came and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror and could not be left alone, daylight though it was, for a moment. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside and talking cheerfully, asking the nurse a number of questions and laughing very heartily at one of the answers. Patting me on the shoulder and kissing me, he told me not to be frightened, that it was nothing but a dream, it could not hurt me. But I was not comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman was not a dream, and I was awfully frightened. I was a little consoled by the nursery maids assuring me that it was she who had come and looked at me and lain down beside me in bed. That I must have been half dreaming not to have known her face, but this, though supported by the nurse, did not quite satisfy me. I remembered, in the course of that day, a venerable old man in a black cassock coming into the room with the nurse and the housekeeper and talking a little to them, and very kindly to me. His face was very sweet and gentle, and he told me they were going to pray. He joined my hands together and desired me to say softly, while they were praying, "Lord, hear all good prayers for us, for Jesus' sake." I think these were the very words, for I often repeated them to myself, and the nurse used for years to make me say them in my prayers. I remembered so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in his black cassock as he stood in that rude, lofty, brown room. The clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering its shadowy atmosphere through the small window. He kneeled, and the three women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice for, what appeared to me, a long time. I forget all my life preceding that event, and for some time after it is also all obscure. Yet the scenes I have just described stand out vivid as the isolated pictures of the phantasmagoria surrounded by darkness. I am now going to tell you something so strange that it will require all your faith in my veracity to believe my story. I love how this follows, like, the classic. Even today, when people write creepypastas, having possibly never read this story, they do the, like, okay, so hear me out. Listen, I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm gonna tell you something so crazy that I cannot have made it up. Trust me on this. It is not only true, nevertheless, but truth of which I have been an eyewitness. It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a little ramble with him along that beautiful forest vista, which I have mentioned as lying in front of the schloss. Hold on, I really have to blow my nose. Where is my handkerchief? Hold on. Take a sip. Okay. General Spielsdorf could not come to us so soon as I had hoped. He was to have paid us a visit of some weeks, and we had expected his arrival next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Reinfeldt. I had never seen her, but I had heard her described as a very charming girl, in whose society I had promised myself many happy days. I was more disappointed than a young lady living in a town or a bustling neighborhood can possibly imagine. This visit and the new acquaintance it promised had furnished my daydream for many weeks. And how soon does he come? Not till autumn, not for 2 months, I dare say, and I'm very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Rheinfeldt. And why? Because the poor young lady is dead. Oh no! I quite forgot I had not told you, but you were not in the room when I received the General's letter this evening. Here it is. I am afraid he is in great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written very nearly in distraction. I was very much shocked. General Spielsdorf had mentioned in his first letter, 6 or 7 weeks before, that she was not so well as he would wish her, but there was nothing to suggest the remotest suspicion of danger. We sat down on a rude bench under a group of magnificent lime trees. The sun was setting with all its melancholy splendor behind the sylvan horizon. The stream that flows beside our home and passes under the steep old bridge wound through many a group of noble trees, almost at our feet, reflecting in its current the fading crimson of the sky. So I was trying to take a sip to clear the phlegm from my throat. I may have to go get some hot tea. General Spielsdorf's letter was so extraordinary, so vehement, and in some places so self-contradictory that I read it twice over, the second time aloud, to my father. Yet I was still unable to account for it, except by supposing that grief had unsettled his mind. It said, I have lost my darling daughter, for as such I loved her. During the last days of dear Bertha's illness, I was not able to write to you. Before then, I had no idea of her danger. I have lost her and now learned all too late. She died in the peace of innocence and in the glorious hope of a blessed futurity. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool I have been! I thank God my child died without a suspicion of the cause of her sufferings. She is gone without so much as conjecturing the nature of her illness, and the accursed passion of the agent of all its misery. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. At present there is scarcely a gleam of light to guide me. I curse my conceited incredulity, my despicable affectation of superiority, my blindness, my obstinacy, all too late. I cannot write or talk collectedly now. I am distracted. So soon as I shall have a little recovered, I mean to devote myself to a time to enquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna. Sometime in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier if I live, I will see you, that is, if you permit me. I will then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend. In these terms ended this strange letter. Though I had never seen Bertha Rheinfeldt with my eyes filled with tears at the sudden intelligence, I was startled. Uh, I was never seen Bertha Rheinfeldt. My eyes filled with tears at the sudden intelligence. I was startled as well as profoundly disappointed. The sun had now set, and it was twilight by the time I had returned the General's letter to my father. It was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences which I had just been reading. Well, see, I'm pretty sure they invited a vampire into their house. We had nearly a mile to walk before reaching the road that passes the Schloss in front, and by that time the moon was shining brilliantly. At the bridge we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de Fontaine, who had come out without their bonnets to enjoy the exquisite moonlight. We heard their voices gabbling an animated dialogue as we approached. We joined them at the bridge and turned about to admire with them the beautiful scene. The glade through which we had just walked lay before us. At our left, the narrow road wound away under clumps of lordly trees, and was lost to sight amid the thickening forest. At the right, the same road crosses the steep and picturesque bridge, near which stands a ruined tower, which once guarded that pass, and beyond the bridge an abrupt eminence rises, covered with trees, and showing in the shadows some gray, ivy-clustered rocks. Over the sward and low grounds, a thin film of mist was stealing like smoke, marking the distances with a transparent veil, and here and there we could see the river, faintly flashing in the moonlight. Eerie. No softer, sweeter scene could be imagined. The news I had just heard made it melancholy, but nothing could disturb its character, a profound serenity, and the enchanted glory and vagueness of the prospect. My father, who enjoyed the picturesque, and I stood looking in silence over the expanse beneath us. The two good governesses, standing a little way behind us, discoursed upon the scene and were eloquent upon the moon. Madame Perrodon was a matronly middle-aged romantic. She talked and sighed poetically. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, in right of her father, who was a German, assumed to be psychological, metaphysical, or something of a mystic. When the moon is shining with a light so intense as it is tonight, it indicates a special spiritual activity. The effect of the full moon in such a state of brilliancy is manifold. It acts on dreams, it acts on lunacy, it acts on nervous people. It has all kinds of marvelous physical influences connected with life. My cousin, who was a mate of a merchant ship, was having a nap on the deck at such a night, lying on his back with his face full in the light of the moon. He awoke after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek, with his features horribly drawn to one side, and his countenance never quite recovered its equilibrium. Did she literally? Oh my god. The moon this night is full of idyllic and magnetic influence. And see, when you look behind you at the front of the schloss, how its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendor, as if unseen hands had lighted up the rooms to receive fairy guests. There are indolent styles of the spirits in which, indisposed to talk ourselves, the talk of others is pleasant to our listless ears, and I gazed on, pleased with the tinkle of the ladies' conversation. I have got into one of my moping moods tonight. In truth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you, but how I caught it, found it, or came by it, I forget the rest. But I feel as if some great misfortune were hanging over us. I suppose the poor general's afflicted letter has something to do with it. At this moment, the sudden sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. Oh, hey, Jessica. Yeah, this game is, well, it's actually more of a visual novel. It's Carmilla, which is based upon a vampire story called Carmilla, that was written, fuck, I can't remember, but it's like Victorian or something. And this is said to be one of the best sort of interpretations of it through the visual novel format. So I've been looking forward to getting to it, and what a better time than Halloween month. Ooh, spooky. At this moment, the sudden sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. They seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon the equipage emerged from that point. 2 horsemen first crossed the bridge, then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. It seemed to be the traveling carriage of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. Oh, cool! I didn't know Carmilla was a inspiration for Dimitrescu. That's cool. And, like, I think this has, it even has a version of itself which is automatically read. So that's cool. So I think it's, like, already narrated and I don't even need to be reading it. But I felt like I had to do something because otherwise I would just be commentating. Although, yeah, actually that would probably be fine. Heck. Oh well. I can see if I can change it to the... I kind of want to see what the narration sounds like, if there is, like, full narration for this. It became, in a few moments, greatly more interesting, for just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest, and after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together, and dashing between the horsemen who rode in front, came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. Ah, yeah. It's possible that Dimitrescu was pulled from, like, multiple inspirations. The 40s, people with a mommy fetish, people with a giantess fetish. some genius who knows how to actually make a female monster. Bloody Mary, Carmilla, all vampire myths, people with a mommy fetish. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the clear, long-drawn screams of a female voice from the carriage window. We all advanced in curiosity and horror, me rather in silence, the rest with various ejaculations of terror. Our suspense did not last long. Just before you reached the castle drawbridge, on the route they were coming, there stands by the roadside a magnificent lime tree. On the other stands an ancient stone cross, aside of which the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved so as to bring the wheel over the projecting roots of the tree. I knew what was coming. I covered my eyes, unable to see it out, and turned my head away. At the same moment, I heard a cry from my lady friends, who had gone on a little. Like, I'm ace, so I'm not directly attracted to her, but I love her design. She's beautiful. Oh yeah, wonderful voice acting for Lady Dimitrescu. Dimitrescu, I think is pronounced. I don't know. Beautiful voice acting. I love her character. I love the giant claws. Very, very good brain candy right there. Curiosity opened my eyes, and I saw a scene of utter confusion. 2 of the horses were on the ground, the carriage lay upon its side with 2 wheels in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding air and figure had got out and stood with clasped hands, raising a handkerchief that was in them every now and then to her eyes. Though the carriage door was now lifted a young lady who appeared to be lifeless. My dear papa was already beside the elder lady, evidently tendering his age and the resources of a schloss. The lady did not appear to hear him, or to have eyes for anything but the slender girl who was being placed against the slope of the bank. Oh my god, I love that she has a bathtub that fits her. Yeah, really she should have the place, like, renovated so that she can fit through doors. I suppose she seems to be used to it for now by all the clips I've seen where she's like bending through a door. It does have a good effect of like you see a normal sized door and then you're like, what? Oh my, oh lord, oh she big. I approached. The young lady was apparently stunned, but she was certainly not dead. My father, who piqued himself on being something of a physician, had just had his fingers on her wrist and assured the lady, who declared herself her mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was undoubtedly still distinguishable. The lady clasped her hands and looked upward as if in a momentary transport of gratitude, but immediately she broke out again in that theatrical way which is, I believe, natural to some people. She was what is called a fine-looking woman for her time of life, and must have been quite beautiful. She was tall but not thin, and dressed in black velvet. She looked rather pale, but with a proud and commanding countenance, though now strangely agitated. Who was ever being so born to calamity? Here I am on a journey of life and death, and prosecuting which to lose an hour is possibly to lose all. My child would not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route, for who can say how long I must leave her? I dare not delay. How far on, sir, can you tell is the nearest village? I must leave her there, and shall not see my darling, or even hear of her till my return, 3 months hence. I plucked my father by the coat, and whispered earnestly in his ear. Oh, papa, pray ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful, please do. If Madame will entrust her child to the care of my daughter and of her good gouvernante, Madame Perrodon, and should she permit her to remain as our guest under my charge until her return, it will confer a distinction and an obligation upon us. We shall treat her with all the care and devotion which so sacred a trust deserves. I cannot do that, sir. It would be to task your kindness and chivalry too cruelly. It would, on the contrary, be to confer upon us a great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune, in a visit from which she had long anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation. Does the daughter have any say in it? Is she just fucking, like, completely in shock on the side of the road and about to be left in a strange castle with some people? Like, not to be rude to the family here, but, like, wouldn't it be nicer for them to go to a town where there's more people and not alone in the middle of the woods with 4 strangers? The nearest village on your route is distant and affords no such inn as you could think of placing your daughter at. You cannot allow her to continue her journey for any considerable distance without danger. Well, that's true, I guess. If, as you say, you cannot suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight, and nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here. I love the Victorian era, but sometimes the way they write is a little difficult for my brain to parse. There was something in this lady's air and appearance so distinguished and even imposing, that in her manner so engaging as to impress one, quite apart from the dignity of her equipage, with a conviction that she was a person of consequence. By this time, the carriage was replaced in its upright position, and the horses quite tractable in the traces again. The lady threw on her daughter a glance which I fancied was not quite so affectionate as one might have anticipated from the beginning of the scene. The daughter is a vampire, right? I'm guessing is the daughter Carmilla and she's a vampire? I'm guessing. As one might have anticipated from the beginning of the scene. Then she beckoned slightly to my father and withdrew 2 or 3 steps with him, out of hearing. She talked to him with a fixed and stern countenance, not at all like that with which she had hitherto spoken. I was filled with wonder that my father did not seem to perceive the change, and also unspeakably curious as to learn what it could be that she was speaking, almost in his ear, with so much earnestness and rapidity. 2 or 3 minutes at most, I think she remained thus employed, then she turned, and a few steps brought her to where her daughter lay, supported by Madame Perrodon. She kneeled beside her for a moment and whispered, as Madame supposed, a little benediction in her ear. Then, hastily kissing her, she stepped into her carriage. The door was closed, the footman in stately livery jumped up behind, the outriders spurred on, the postilions cracked their whips, the horses plunged and broke suddenly into a furious canter that threatened soon again to become a gallop, and the carriage whirled away, followed at the same rapid pace by the 2 horsemen in the rear. Alright, congratulations on your new friend! She's a little out of it, but I'm sure she'll be fine. We followed the cortege with our eyes until it was swiftly lost to sight in the misty wood, and the very sound of the hoofs and the wheels died away in the silent air. Hold on, can I turn on the... What is it? Okay, V.
Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure had not been an illusion
Okay,
of a moment but the young lady, who just at that moment opened her eyes.
I'm not a huge fan of the computer voice. It is nice that they have a computer voice, but I know this was like an indie game, maybe by like 1 person, so it's possible they couldn't have gotten the full narration. I'm eating some frozen blueberries to soothe my throat. It's gonna be a lot of talking. Yeah, sometimes you need to take friends where you can get them. Even if they're randomly dropped on your doorstep in the middle of the night by a strange lady in a robe. Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure had not been an illusion of a moment, but the young lady who just at that moment opened her eyes. I could not see, for her face was turned from me, but she raised her head, evidently looking about her, and I heard a very sweet voice ask complainingly, "Where is Mamma?" Our good Madame Perrodon answered tenderly and added some comfortable assurances. "Where am I? What is this place? I don't see the carriage, and Matsuka, where is she?" Very anime, I love this design. Madame answered all her questions in so far as she understood them, and gradually the young lady remembered how the misadventure came about. She was glad to hear that no one in or in attendance on the carriage was hurt, and on learning that her mamma had left her here till her return in about 3 months, she wept. I was going to add my consolations to those of Madame Perrodon when Mademoiselle de la Fontaine placed her hand upon my arm. Don't approach. One at a time, as much as she can at present converse with. A very little excitement would possibly overpower her now. As soon as she is comfortably in bed, I thought I will run up to her room and see her. Yep, this game was definitely made by a huge fucking weeb. But you gotta admit, the designs are really cute. My father, in the meantime, had sent a servant on horseback for the physician, who lived about 2 leagues away, and a bedroom was being prepared for the young lady's reception. Fucking read the rest of it like, the stranger now rose, and leaning on Madame's arm, walked slowly over the bridge and into the castle gate. Ooh, no, I will not do that, because I'm pretty sure a lightning bolt will strike me right through the house. Sorry. The stranger now rose, and leaning on Madame's arm, walked slowly over the bridge and into the castle gate. In the hall, servants waited to receive her, and she was conducted forthwith to her room. The room we usually sat in as our drawing room is long, having 3 windows that looked upon the forest scene I have just described. Loving the red candles, very moody, very goth, beautiful. It is furnished in old carved oak with large carved cabinets, and the chairs are cushioned with crimson Utrecht velvet. Perfect place to leave a vampire. Yeah, the cloak and the stockings are super cute. I would totally cosplay this character. Or make a doll mod of her, ooh. The walls are covered with tapestry and surrounded with great gold frames, the figures being as large as life, in ancient and very curious costume, and the subjects represented are hunting, hawking, and generally festive. It is not too stately to be extremely comfortable, and here we had our tea, for with this usually patriotic leanings, Papa insisted the national beverage should make its appearance regularly with our coffee and chocolate. We sat here this night, and with candles lighted, we were talking over the adventure of the evening. Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine were both of our party. The young stranger had hardly lain down in her bed when she sank into a deep sleep, and those ladies had left her in the care of a servant. How do you like our guest? Tell me all about her. I like her extremely. She is, I almost think, the prettiest creature I ever saw, about your age, and so gentle and nice. She is absolutely beautiful. And such a sweet voice. Did you remark a woman in the carriage after it was set up again, who did not get out, but only looked from the window? No, I have not seen her. She was a hideous woman with a sort of colored turban on her head, who kept gazing from the carriage window, all the while nodding and grinning derisively toward us with gleaming eyes and large white eyeballs, and her teeth set as if in fury. Did you remark what an ill-looking pack of men the servants were? Yes, ugly, hangdog-looking fellows as I ever beheld in my life. I hope they mayn't rob the poor lady in the forest. They're just fucking roasting these guys. They are clever rogues, however. They got everything to rights in a minute. I dare say they're worn out with too long traveling. Besides looking wicked, their faces were so strangely lean and dark and sullen. Vampire minions, they're vampire minions. I am very curious, I own, but I dare say the young lady will tell you all about it tomorrow, if she is sufficiently recovered. I don't think she will. At that he smiled mysteriously and slightly nodded his head as if he knew more about it than he cared to tell us. This made us all the more inquisitive as to what had passed between him and the lady in the black velvet, in the brief but earnest interview that had immediately preceded her departure. We were scarcely alone when I entreated him to tell me. He did not need much pressing. There is no particular reason why I should not tell you. She expressed a reluctance to trouble us with the care of her daughter, saying she was in a delicate health and nervous, but not subject to any kind of seizure, she volunteered that, nor to any illusion, being in fact perfectly sane. How very odd to say all that. Don't worry, the kid's a little sick, but not sick in the head. Trust me, she's fine. It was so unnecessary. At all events, it was said, as you wish to know all that passed, which was indeed very little, I tell you. She then said, I am making a long journey of vital importance. She emphasized the word, rapid and secret. I shall return for my child in 3 months. In the meantime, she will be silent as to who we are, whence we come, and whither we are traveling. That is all she said. She spoke very pure French. When she said the word secret, she paused for a few seconds, looking sternly, her eyes fixed on mine. I fancy she makes a great point of that. You saw how quickly she was gone. I hope I have not done a very foolish thing in taking charge of the young lady. We'll see. For my part, I was delighted. I was longing to see and talk to her, and only waiting till the doctor should give me leave. You who live in towns can have no idea how great an event the introduction of a new friend is, and such solitude has surrounded us. The doctor did not arrive till nearly 1 o'clock, but I could no more have gone to my bed and slept than I could have overtaken on foot the carriage in which the princess in black velvet had driven away. When the physician came down to the drawing room, it was to report very favorably upon his patient. She was now sitting up, her pulse quite regular, apparently perfectly well. She had sustained no injury, and the little shock to her nerves had passed away quite harmlessly. There could be no harm, certainly, in my seeing her, if we both wished it, and with this permission I sent forthwith to know whether she would allow me to visit her for a few minutes in her room. The servant returned immediately to say that she desired nothing more. You may be sure I was not long in availing myself of this permission. New bestie! Our visitor lay in one of the handsomest rooms in the Schloss. It was, perhaps, a little stately. There was a somber piece of tapestry opposite the foot of the bed, representing Cleopatra with the snakes at her bosom. Other solemn classic scenes were displayed, a little faded, upon the walls. But there was a gold carving and rich and varied color enough in the other decorations of the room to more than redeem the gloom of the old tapestry. There were candles at the bedside. She was sitting up, her slender, pretty figure enveloped in the soft silk dressing gown, which her mother had thrown over her feet as she lay upon the ground. And what was it that, as I reached the bedside and had just begun my little greeting, struck me dumb in a moment and made me recoil a step or two from before her? I will tell you. I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood at night, which remained so fixed in my memory, and on which I had for so many years so often ruminated with horror, when no one suspected of what I was thinking. Aha, I knew it! It was pretty, even beautiful, and when I first beheld it, I wore the same melancholy expression. I need to eat more blueberries, hold on. Very goth, yes. It may be considered to be one of the best interpretations of the Carmilla story in visual novel format, but they did not skimp on the anime. Just looks on you like, mediocre. But this almost instantly lighted into a strange fixed smile of recognition. There was a silence of fully a minute, and then at length she spoke. I could not. How wonderful! 12 years ago I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since. 12 years ago, in vision or reality, I certainly saw you. I cannot forget your face. It has remained before my eyes ever since. Well, wonderful indeed! With an effort I overcame the horror that had for a time suspended my utterances. Her smile had softened. Whatever I had fancied strange in it was gone, and in it her dimpling cheeks were now delightfully pretty and intelligent. I felt reassured and continued more in the vein which hospitality indicated, to bid her welcome and to tell her how much pleasure her accidental arrival had given us all, especially what a happiness it was to me. I took her hand as I spoke. I was a little shy, as lonely people are, but the situation made me eloquent and even bold. She pressed my hand, she laid hers upon it, and her eyes glowed, as looking hastily into mine, she smiled again, and blushed. Lesbian vampires! She answered my welcome very prettily. I sat down beside her, still in awe. I must tell you my vision about you. It is so strange that you and I should have had, each of the other, so vivid a dream, that each should have seen I you and you me, looking as we do now, when of course we were both mere children. I was a child, about 6 years old, when I awoke from a confused and troubled dream and found myself in a room, unlike my nursery, wainscoted clumsily in some dark wood, and with some cupboards and bedsteads and chairs, and benches placed about it. The beds were, I thought, all empty, and the room itself without anyone but myself in it. After looking about me for some time and admiring especially an iron candlestick with 2 branches, which I should certainly know again, I crept under one of the beds to reach the window. But as I got from under the bed, I heard someone crying, and looking up while I was still upon my knees, I saw you, most assuredly you, as I see you now. A beautiful young lady with golden hair and large blue eyes, and lips, your lips, you as you are here. Your looks won me. I climbed on the bed and put my arms around you, and I think we both fell asleep. I was aroused by a scream. You were sitting up screaming. I was frightened and slipped down upon the ground, and it seemed to me lost consciousness for a moment, as when I came to myself I was again in my nursery at home. Your face I have never forgotten since. I cannot be misled by mere resemblance. You are the lady whom I saw then. It was now my turn to relate my corresponding vision, which I did, to the undisguised wonder of my new acquaintance. I don't know which should be most afraid of the other. If you were less pretty, I think I should be very much afraid of you, but being as you are, and you and I both so young, I feel only that I have made your acquaintance 12 years ago, and have already a right to your intimacy. At all events, it does seem as if we were destined from our earliest childhood to be friends. Possibly gal pals? It's just reading very lesbian to me. I heard that this was a very lesbian vampire story, but like, wow. Wow, dude. Very, very romantic here. I wonder whether you feel as strangely drawn toward me as I do to you. I've never had a friend. Shall I find one now? Yes. You shall find a friend and girlfriend. Now, the truth is, I felt rather unaccountably towards the beautiful stranger. I did feel, as she said, drawn towards her, but there was also something of repulsion. In this ambiguous feeling, however, the sense of attraction immensely prevailed. She interested and won me. She was so beautiful and so indescribably engaging. I perceived now something of languor and exhaustion stealing over her, and hastened to bid her good night. The doctor thinks that you ought to have a maid to sit up with you tonight. One of ours is waiting, and you will find her a very useful and quiet creature. How kind of you, but I could not sleep. I never could with an attendant in the room. I shan't require any assistance, and shall I confess my weakness, I'm haunted with a terror of robbers. Our house was robbed once, and 2 servants murdered, so I always lock my door. It has become a habit, and you look so kind, I know you will forgive me. I see there's a key in the lock. She held me close in her pretty arms for a moment and whispered in my ear, "Good night, darling. It's very hard to part with you, but good night. Tomorrow, but not early, I shall see you again." She sank back on the pillow with a sigh, and her fine eyes followed me with a fond and melancholy gaze, and she murmured again, "Good night, dear friend." Aw. Young people like me, and even love on impulse. Like and even love on impulse, I was flattered by the evident, though as I saw yet undeserved fondness she showed me. I liked the confidence with which she at once perceived me. She was determined that we should be very near friends. Next day came, and we met again. I was delighted with my companion, that is to say, in many respects. 6 feet lady. Well, it did say that her mom was tall, so, like... Her looks lost nothing in daylight. She was certainly the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, and the unpleasant remembrance of the face presented in my early dream had lost the effect of the first unexpected recognition. She confessed that she had experienced a similar shock on seeing me, and precisely the same faint antipathy that had mingled with my admiration of her. We now laughed together over our momentary horrors. Chapter 2. Drifting. Yes, measure slightly less than 1 Lady Dimitrescu. That is the distance you should be kept away. Oh yeah, 6 feet. Thankfully, this was far before the great pandemic we experience today, but you know, back then they had all sorts of diseases. Some of them transmitted through, you know, biting. I told you that I was charmed with her in most particulars. Yet there were some that did not please me so well. I shall begin by describing her. She was above the middle height of women. She was slender and wonderfully graceful, except that her movements were languid. Very languid indeed. Yet there was nothing in her appearance to indicate an invalid. Her complexion was rich and brilliant, her features were small and beautifully formed, her eyes large, dark, and lustrous. Her hair was quite wonderful. I never saw hair so magnificently thick and long when it was down about her shoulders. I have often placed my hands under it and laughed with wonder at its weight. It was exquisitely fine and soft, and in color a rich, dark brown with a violet shimmer. I loved to let it down, tumbling with its own weight as she lay back in her chair, talking in her sweet, low voice. I used to fold and braid it and spread it out and play with it. Heavens, if I had but known all! I said there were particulars which did not please me. I have told you that her confidence won me the first night I saw her. Yet I found that she exercised, with respect to herself, her mother, her history, everything in fact connected with her life plans and people, an ever-wakeful reserve. I dare say I was unreasonable. Perhaps I was wrong. I dare say I ought to have respected the solemn injunction laid upon my father by the stately lady in black velvet. But curiosity is a restless and unscrupulous passion, and no one girl can endure with patience that hers should be baffled by another. What harm could it do to anyone to tell me what I was so ardently desired to know? Had she no trust in my good sense or honor? Why would she not believe me when I assured her so solemnly that I would not divulge one syllable of what she told me to any mortal breathing? There was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years, in her smiling, melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light. I cannot say we quarreled upon this point, for she would not quarrel upon any. It was, of course, very unfair of me to press her, very ill-bred, but I really could not help it, and I might just as well have let it alone. Oh yeah, I like how just it puts they have a lot of expression. It has a lot of, the faces are very expressive, even when it's just the eyes moving around, the eyes and eyebrows. Limited animation can do a lot. What she did tell me amounted, in my unconscionable estimation, to nothing. It was all summed up in 3 very vague disclosures. First, her name was Carmilla. I knew it. Second, her family was very ancient and noble. Third, her home lay in the direction of the west. Alright, see you, Cheska. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Probably see you lurking around in other people's streams. And I'll try to lurk in yours. She would not tell me the name of her family, nor their armorial bearings, nor the name of their estate, nor even that of the country they lived in. You are not to suppose that I worried her incessantly on these subjects. I watched opportunity and rather insinuated than urged my inquiries. Once or twice, indeed, I did attack her more directly, but no matter what my tactics, utter failure was invariably the result. Reproaches and caresses were all lost upon her, but I must add that her evasion was conducted with so pretty and melancholy and deprecation, with so many, and even passionate, declarations of her liking for me, trust in my honor, and with so many promises that I should at last know all, that I could not find it in my heart long to be offended with her. She used to place her pretty arms about my neck, draw me to her, and laying her cheek to mine, murmur with her lips near my ear, "In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die, sweetly die, into mine." That's kind of ominous. And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace, and her lips in soft kisses gently glow upon my cheek. Think me not cruel, because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your heart is wounded, mine pleads with yours. I cannot help it as I draw near to you, You, in your turn, will draw near to others and learn the rapture of that cruelty, which yet is love. So for a while seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me, with all your loving spirit. Aw, her agitations and her language were unintelligible to me. From these foolish embraces, which were not a very frequent occurrence, I must allow, I used to wish to extricate myself, but my energy seemed to fail me. Her murmured words sounded like a lullaby in my ear and soothed my resistance into a trance, from which I only seemed to recover myself when she withdrew her arms. In these mysterious moods, I did not like her. Are we related? I used to ask. What can you mean by all this? I remind you perhaps of someone whom you love, but you must not. I hate it. I don't know you. I don't know myself when you look so and talk so. It's a crush. Just get over it. You like her. She just sighed at my vehemence, then turned away and dropped my hand. I experienced a strange tumultuous excitement that was pleasurable ever and anon, mingled with a vague sense of fear and disgust. I had no distinct thoughts about her while such scenes lasted, but I was conscious of a love growing into adoration, and also of abhorrence. This I know is paradox, but I can make no other attempt to explain the feeling. I tremble now with a confused and horrible recollection of certain occurrences and situations, and the ordeal through which I was unconsciously passing, through which a vivid and very sharp remembrance of the main current of my story. But I suspect in all lives there are certain emotional scenes, those in which our passions have been most wildly and terribly roused, that are of all others most vaguely and dimly remembered. Sometimes after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with the tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardor of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful and yet overpowering. And with gloating eyes she drew me to her, and her hot lips traveled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper almost in sobs, "You are mine, you shall be mine. You and I are one forever." Okay, they are officially girlfriends by now. Then she had thrown herself back in her chair with her small hands over her eyes, leaving me trembling. Respecting these very extraordinary manifestations, I strove in vain to form any satisfactory theory. I cannot refer to them to affectation. I cannot refer them to affectation or trick. It was unmistakably the momentary breaking out of suppressed instinct and emotion. Was she, notwithstanding her mother's volunteered denial, subject to brief visitations of insanity, or is there a disguise and a romance? I had read in old storybooks of such things. What if a boyish lover had found his way into the house and sought to prosecute his suit in masquerade with the assistance of a clever old adventuress? But there were many things against this hypothesis, highly interesting as it was to my vanity. I could boast of no little attention such as masculine gallantry delights to offer. Between these passionate moments there were long intervals of commonplace, of gaiety. Yet there were also times of brooding melancholy during which her eyes, always following me, were full of melancholy fire. Except in these brief periods of mysterious excitement, her ways were girlish, and there was always a languor about her, quite incompatible with a masculine system in a state of health. She's wondering if Carmilla is a boy in disguise who's come to court her. Girl, that's the compet. You can like girls too. What if we kissed in the Gothic mansion in the middle of nowhere, and we were both girls? JK, haha. Unless. In some respects, her habits were odd, perhaps not so singular in the opinion of a town person like you, as they appeared to us rustic people. She used to come down very late, generally not till 1 o'clock. She would then take a cup of chocolate, but eat nothing. We then went out for a walk, which was a mere saunter, and she seemed almost immediately exhausted, and either returned to the schloss or sat on one of the benches that were placed here and there among the trees. This was a bodily languor in which her mind did not sympathize. She was always an animated talker and very intelligent. She sometimes alluded for a moment to her own home, or mentioned an adventure or situation, or an early recollection which indicated a people of strange manners and described customs of which we knew nothing. I gathered from these chance hints that her native country was much more remote than I had at first fancied. As we stood thus one afternoon under the trees, a funeral passed us by. It was that of a pretty young girl whom I had often seen, the daughter of one of the rangers of the forest. The poor man was walking behind the coffin of the coffin of his darling. She was his only child, and he looked quite heartbroken. What's up with all these dying daughters? Peasants walking two and two came behind. They were singing a funeral hymn. Wait, did Carmilla slip out at night and get to another person's daughter? I rose to mark my respect as they passed, and joined in the hymn they were very sweetly singing. My companion shook me a little roughly, and I turned surprised. Don't you perceive how discordant that is? No, I think it very sweet, on the contrary. You pierce my ears. Besides, how can you tell that your religion and mine are the same? Your forms wound me, and I hate funerals. What a fuss. Why you must die, everyone must die, and all are happier when they do. Come home. My father has gone on with the clergyman to the churchyard. I thought you knew she was to be buried today. She? I don't trouble my head about peasants. I don't know who she is. She is the poor girl who fancied she saw a ghost a fortnight ago, and has been dying ever since till yesterday, when she expired. Tell me nothing about ghosts. I shan't sleep tonight if you do. I hope there is no plague or fever coming. All this looks very like it. The swineherd's young wife died only a week ago, and she thought something seized her by the throat as she lay in her bed, nearly strangled her. It was vampires. Papa said such horrible fancies do accompany some forms of fever. She was quite well the day before. She sank afterwards and died before a week. Well, her funeral is over, I hope, and her hymn sung, and our ears shan't be tortured with that discordant jargon. It has made me nervous. Sit down here beside me, sit close, hold my hand, press it harder. We had moved a little back and had come to another seat. She had sat down. Her face underwent a change that alarmed and even terrified me for a moment. It darkened and became horribly livid. Her teeth and hands were clenched, and she frowned and compressed her lips while she stared down upon the ground at her feet, and trembled all over with a continued shudder as irrepressible as shiver. All her energy seemed strained to suppress a fit with which she was then breathlessly tugging, and at length a low convulsive cry of suffering broke from her, and gradually the hysteria subsided. There, that comes of strangling people with hymns. Hold me still. It's passing away. The holy song must have hurt her, and so, gradually it did. And perhaps to dissipate the somber impression which the spectacle had left upon me, she became unusually animated and chatty, and so we got home. This was the first time I had seen her exhibit any definable symptoms of that delicacy of health which her mother had spoken of. It was the first time also I had seen her exhibit anything like temper. Both passed away like a summer cloud, but never but once afterwards did I witness on her part a momentary sign of anger. Helping my throat again? Okay. I will tell you how it happened. She and I were looking out of one of the long drawing room windows when there entered the courtyard over the drawbridge a figure of a wanderer whom I knew very well. He used to visit the Slosh generally twice a year. It was the figure of a hunchback with the sharp, lean features that generally accompany deformity. He wore a pointed black beard, and he was smiling from ear to ear, showing his white fangs. He was dressed in black and crossed with more straps and belts than I could count, from which hung all manner of things. Behind, he carried a magic lantern, two boxes, which I knew, and one of which was a salamander, and the other a mandrake. Is it just did people just go around doing that back then? These monsters used to make my father laugh. They were compounded of parts of monkeys, parrots, squirrels, fish, and hedgehogs, dried and stitched together with great neatness and startling effect. He had a fiddle, a box of conjuring apparatus, a pair of foils and masks attached to his belt, several other mysterious cases dangling about him, and a black staff with copper ferrules in his hand. Okay, so he goes around entertaining people and selling knickknacks. His companion was a rough, spare dog that followed at his heels, but stopped short, suspiciously at the drawbridge, and in a little while began to howl dismally. In the meantime, the mountebank, standing in the midst of the courtyard, raised his grotesque hat, and made us a very ceremonious bow, playing his companions very volubly in execrable French, and German not much better. Hey there, pal. Then, disengaging his fiddle, he began to scrape a lively air, to which he sang with a merry discord, dancing with ludicrous airs and activity that made me laugh in spite of the dog's howling. Then he advanced to the window with many smiles and salutations, and his hat left his hand, his fiddle under his arm, and with a fluency that never took breath. He gabbled a long advertisement of all his accomplishments and the resources of the various arts which he placed at our service, and the curiosities and entertainments which it was in his power at our bidding to display. Will your ladyships be pleased to buy an amulet against the vampire, which is going like the wolf I hear through these woods? They are dying a bit left and right, and here is a charm that never fails, only pinned to the pillow, and you may laugh in his face. Up in his face. These charms consisted of oblong slips of vellum with cabalistic ciphers and diagrams upon them. Carmilla instantly purchased one, and so did I. She knows they do nothing. She just wants to look like she's warding off the vampire, so that they don't suspect that she is the vampire. He was looking up, and we were smiling down upon him, amused. At least I can answer for myself. His piercing eye, as he looked up in our faces, seemed to detect something that fixed for a moment his curiosity. In an instant he unrolled a leather case full of all manner of odd little steel instruments. See here, my lady, I profess, among other things less useful, the art of dentistry. Plague, take the dog. Silence, beast. Did he kick the dog? He howls so that your ladyships can scarcely hear a word. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth, long, thin, pointed, like an awl, like a needle, ha! With my sharp and long sight, as I look up, I have seen it distinctly. Now, if it happens to hurt the young lady, and I think it must, here am I, here are my file, my punch, my nippers. I will make it round and blunt, if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but of a beautiful young lady as she is. Carmilla doesn't look happy about this. Hey, is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her? I think you have. Perhaps. The young lady indeed looked very angry as she drew back from the window. How dares that mountebank insult us so? Where is your father? I shall demand redress from him. My father would have had the wretch tied up to the pump and flogged with a cart whip and burnt to the bones with the kettle brand. She retired from the window a step or two and sat down, which had hardly lost sight of the offender, when her wrath subsided as suddenly as it had risen, and she gradually recovered her usual tone, and seemed to forget the little hunchback and his follies. My father was out of spirits that evening. On coming in, he told us that there had been another case very similar to the two fatal ones which had lately occurred. The sister of a young peasant on his estate, only a mile away, was very ill, had been, as she described it, attacked very nearly in the same way, and was now slowly but steadily sinking. All this is strictly referable to natural causes. These poor people infect one another with their superstitions, and so repeat in imagination the images of terror that have infested their neighbors. But that very circumstance frightens one horribly. How so? I am so afraid of fancying I see such things. I think it would be as bad as reality. We are in God's hands. Nothing can happen without his permission, and all will end well for those who love him. He is our faithful creator, has made us all, and will take care of us. Creator, nature. And this disease that invades the country is natural. Nature. All things proceed from nature, don't they? All things in the heaven, in the earth, and under the earth act and live as nature ordains? I think so. The doctor said he would come here today. I want to know what he thinks about it and what he thinks we had better do. Doctors never did me any good. Then you have been ill? More ill than you ever were. Long ago? Yes, a long time. I suffered from this very illness, but I forget all my pain and weakness, and they were not so bad as are suffered in other diseases. You were very young then? I dare say. Let us talk no more of it. You would not wound a friend. She looked languidly in my eyes and passed her arm around my waist lovingly. My father was busy over some papers near the window. Why does your papa like to frighten us so? He doesn't, dear Camilla. It is the very furthest thing from his mind. Are you afraid, dearest? I should be very much if I fancied there were any real danger of my being attacked as though those poor people were. You are afraid to die? Yes, everyone is. But to die as lovers may, to die together so that they may live together. Girls are caterpillars while they live in the world, to be finally butterflies when the summer comes, but in the meantime there are grubs and larvae. Don't you see, each with their peculiar propensities, necessities, and structure? So says Monsieur Buffon in his big book in the next room. Later in the evening, the doctor came and was closeted with Papa for some time. He was a skillful man, of 60 and upwards. He wore powder and shaved his pale face as smooth as a pumpkin. He and Papa emerged from the room together, and I heard Papa laugh. Well, I do wonder at a wise man like you. What do you say to hippogriffs and dragons? Nevertheless, life and death are mysterious states, and we know little of the resources of either. And so they walked on, and I heard no more, but I did not then know what the doctor had been broaching, but I think I guess it now. This evening there arrived from Gratz the grave, dark-faced son of the picture cleaner, with a horse and cart laden with 2 large packing cases, having many pictures in each. It was a journey of 10 leagues, and whenever a messenger arrived at the Schloss from a little capital of Gratz, we used to crowd about him in the hall to hear the news. Oh, I accidentally right-clicked. This arrival created in our secluded quarters quite a sensation. The cases remained in the hall, and the messenger was taken charge of by the servants till he had eaten his supper. Then, with assistance and armed with hammer, ripping chisel, and turnscrew, he met us in the hall, where we had assembled to witness the unpacking of the cases. Carmilla sat looking listlessly on, while one after another the old pictures, nearly all portraits, which had undergone the process of renovation, were brought to light. My mother was of an old Hungarian family, and most of these pictures, which were about to be restored to their places, had come to us through her. My father had a list in his hand, from which he read as the artist rummaged about the corresponding numbers. I don't know that the pictures were very good, but they were undoubtedly very old, and some of them very curious also. They had, for the most part, the merit of being now seen by me, I may say, for the first time, for the smoke and dust of time had all but obliterated them. There is a picture that I have not seen yet. In one corner at the top of it is the name, as well as I could read, Marcia Karnstein, and the date 1698, and I am curious to see how it has turned out. I remember it. It was about 2 feet high and nearly square, without a frame, but it was so blackened by age that I cannot make it out. The artist now produced it with evident pride. It was quite beautiful. It was startling. It seemed to live. It was the effigy of Carmilla. Carmilla, dear, here is an absolute miracle. Here you are, living, smiling, ready to speak in this picture. Isn't it beautiful, Papa? And see, even the little mole on her throat. Mole? Certainly it is a wonderful likeness. Yet he looked away, and to my surprise seemed but little struck by it, and went on talking to the picture cleaner. The dad's not very observant. The latter was also something of an artist, and discoursed with intelligence about the portraits or other works, which his art had just brought into light and color. portrait refinishing and like portrait cleaning and restoration is still like a big thing today. Well, not like a big thing, but like there are people who specifically practice painting restoration and artwork restoration. I watched videos of it and it's fascinating. Meanwhile, I was more and more lost in wonder the more I looked at the picture. Will you let me hang this picture in my room, Papa? Oh, certainly, dear. I'm very glad you think it so like. It must be prettier even than I thought it, if it is. The young lady did not acknowledge this pretty speech, did not seem to hear it. She was leaning back in her seat, her fine eyes under their long lashes gazing on me in contemplation, and she smiled in a kind of rapture. And now you can read quite plainly the name that is written in the corner. It is not Marcia. It looks as if it was done in gold. The name is Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. And this is a little coronet over and underneath A.D. 1698. I am descended from the Karnsteins. That is, Mama was. Ah, so am I think. A very long descent, very ancient. Are there any Karnsteins living now? None who bear the name, I believe. The family were ruined in some civil wars long ago, but the ruins of the castle are only about 3 miles away. How interesting. Huh, so they're like distantly related? But see what beautiful moonlight. She glanced through the hall door, which stood a little open. Suppose you take a little ramble around the court and look down at the road and river. It is so like the night you came to us. She rose, and each with their arm around the other's waist, we walked out upon the pavement. In silence, slowly we walked down to the drawbridge, where the beautiful landscape opened before us. I do love this picture. Really good background art in this. And so you were thinking of the night I came here. Are you glad I came? Delighted, dear Carmilla. And you asked for the picture you think like me to hang in your room? She sighed and drew her arm closer about my waist. How romantic you are, Camilla. Whenever you tell me your story, it will be made up chiefly of some one great romance. I am sure, Carmilla, you have been in love, that there is at this moment an affair of the heart going on. I have been in love with no one, and never shall, unless it should be with you. Ah. How beautiful she looked in the moonlight. She exhaled shakily as she let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. She kissed me silently. Shy and strange was the look with which she quickly hid her face in my neck and hair, which appealed to a sighs that seemed almost a sob, and pressed in mine a hand that trembled. Seems like Carmilla is fully on the girlfriend route, while our narrator here is either not sure about it, or she's just not gay. And it's like an unrequited love kind of thing. That's sad. Her soft cheek was glowing against mine. Darling, darling, I live in you, and you would die for me. I love you so. I started from her. She was gazing on me with eyes from which all fire, all meaning had flown, and a face colorless and apathetic. Is there a chill in the air, dear? I almost shiver. Have I been dreaming? Let us come in. Come in. You look ill, Carmilla, a little faint. You must certainly take some wine. Yes, I will. I'm better now. I shall be quite well in a few minutes. Yes, do give me a little wine. Let us look again for a moment. It is the last time, perhaps, I shall see the moonlight with you. How do you feel now, dear Carmilla? Are you really better? I was beginning to take alarm, lest she should have been stricken with the strange epidemic that they said had invaded the country about us. Papa would be grieved beyond measure if he thought you were ever so little ill without immediately letting us know. We have a very skillful doctor near us, a physician who is with Papa today. I am sure he is. I know how kind you all are, but, dear child, I'm quite well again. There's nothing ever wrong with me, but a little weakness. People say I am languid. I am incapable of exertion. I can scarcely walk as far as a child of 3 years old. And every now and then the little strength I have falters, and I become as you have just seen me. But after all, I am very easily set up again. In a moment I am perfectly myself. See how I have recovered. So indeed she had. She and I talked a great deal, and very animated she was, and the remainder of that evening passed without any recurrence of what I called her infatuations. I need some more blueberries, hold on. I mean, her crazy talking looks, which embarrassed and even frightened me. But there occurred that night an event which gave my thoughts quite a new turn, and seemed to startle even Carmilla's languid nature into momentary energy. Chapter 3 Descending. I love this font. When we got into the drawing room and had sat down to our coffee and chocolate, although Carmilla did not take any, she seemed quite herself again. Madame and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine joined us and made a little card party, in the course of which Papa came in for what he called his dish of tea. When the game was over, he sat down beside Carmilla on the sofa. Carmilla, have you perhaps heard anything from your mother since your arrival here? No. Would you happen to know where a letter would reach her at present? I cannot tell, but I've been thinking of leaving you. You have been already too hospitable and too kind to me. I have... She's like, I have given you an infinity of trouble, and should wish to take a carriage tomorrow and post in pursuit of her. I know where I shall ultimately find her, though I dare not yet tell you. But you must not dream of any such thing. We can't afford to lose you so. And I won't consent to your leaving us, except under the care of your mother, who was so good as to consent to your remaining with us till she should herself return. I should be quite happy if I knew that you heard from her, but this evening the accounts of the progress of the mysterious disease that has invaded our neighborhood grow even more alarming. And my beautiful guest, I do feel the responsibility, unaided by advice from your mother, very much, but I shall do my best. And one thing is certain, that you must not think of leaving us without her distinct direction to that effect. We should suffer too much in parting from you to consent to it easily. Thank you, sir, 1,000 times for your hospitality. You have all been too kind to me. I have seldom been so happy in all my life before as in your beautiful chateau, under your care, and the society of your dear daughter. So he gallantly, in his old-fashioned way, kissed her hand, smiling and pleased at her little speech. I accompanied Carmilla as usual to her room and sat and chatted with her while she was preparing for bed. Do you think that you will ever confide in me truly? She turned round smiling but made no answer, only continued to smile on me. You won't answer that? You can't answer pleasantly. You can't answer pleasantly. I ought not to have asked you. You were quite right to ask me that, or anything. You do not know how dear you are to me, or you cannot think any confidence too great to look for. But I am under vows, none half so awfully, and I dare not tell my story yet, even to you. The time is very near when you shall know everything. You think me cruel, very selfish, but love is always selfish. The more ardent, the more selfish. How jealous I am that you cannot know. You must come with me, loving me to death, or else hate me and still come with me, and hating me through death and after. There is no such word as indifference in my apathetic nature. Now, Carmilla, you're going to talk your wild nonsense again. Not I, silly little fool as I am, and full of whims and fancies. For your sake, I'll talk like a sage. Were you ever at a ball? No. How you do run on? What is it like? How charming it must be. I almost forget, it was years ago. You're not so old. Your first ball can hardly be forgotten yet. I remember everything about it, with an effort. I see it all, as divers see what is going on above them, through a medium, dense, rippling, but transparent. There occurred that night what has confused the picture and made its colors faint. I was all but assassinated in my bed, wounded here and never was the same since. Were you near dying? Yes, very. A cruel love, strange love, that would have taken my life. Love will have its sacrifices, no sacrifice without blood. Let us go to sleep now. I feel so lazy. How can I get up just now and lock my door? She was lying with her tiny hands buried in her rich wavy hair, under her cheek, her little head upon the pillow, and her glittering eyes followed me wherever I moved with a kind of shy smile that I could not decipher. I bid her good night and crept from the room with an uncomfortable sensation. I often wondered whether our pretty guest ever said her prayers. I certainly had never seen her upon her knees. In the morning, she never came down until long after our family prayers were over, and at night she never left the drawing room to attend our brief evening prayers in the hall. If it had not been that it casually come out in one of our careless talks that she had been baptized, I should not have doubted her being a Christian. Religion was a subject on which I had never heard her speak a word. If I had known the world better, this particular neglect or antipathy would not have so much surprised me. The precautions of nervous people are infectious, and persons of a like temperament are pretty sure, after a time, to imitate them. I had adopted Carmilla. Ah! Heck, I accidentally pressed it. What was it? Page up? Ah, it's not working. Heck. I had also adopted her precaution in making a brief search through her room to satisfy herself that no lurking assassin or robber was ensconced. These wise measures taken, I got into my bed and fell asleep. If I... Okay, that didn't work. A light was burning in my room. This was an old habit of very early date, which nothing could have tempted me to dispense with. Thus fortified, I might take my rest in peace, but dreams come through stone walls, light up dark rooms, or darken light ones, and their persons make their exits and their entrances as they please and laugh at locksmiths. Ain't that just how dreams be? I had a dream that night that was the beginning of a very strange agony. I cannot call it a nightmare, for I was quite conscious of being asleep, but I was equally conscious of being in my room and lying in bed, precisely as I actually was. I saw, or fancied I saw, the room and its furniture just as I had seen it last, except that it was very dark, and I saw something moving round at the foot of the bed, which at first I could not accurately distinguish. But I soon saw that it had a sooty black animal that resembled a monstrous cat. It appeared to me about 4 or 5 feet long, for it measured fully the length of the hearthrug as it passed over it. It continued toing and froing with the lithe, sinister restlessness of a beast in a cage. I could not cry out, although, as you may suppose, I was terrified. Aw, damn, you got that sleep paralysis. Its pace was growing faster, and the room rapidly darker and darker, and at length so dark that I could no longer see anything of it but its eyes. Ah. Well then, I felt it spring lightly onto the bed, then 2 broad eyes approached my face, and suddenly I felt a stinging pain, as if 2 large needles darted an inch or 2 apart deep into my breast. I woke with a scream. The room was lighted by the candle that burnt there all through the night, and I saw a female figure standing at the foot of the bed, a little at the right side. It was in a dark, loose dress, and its hair was down and covered its shoulders. A block of stone could not have been more still. There was not the slightest stir of respiration. As I stared at it, the figure appeared to have changed its place and was now nearer the door, then close to it. Then the door opened and it passed out. I was now relieved and able to breathe and move. My first thought was that Carmilla had been playing me a trick and that I had forgotten to secure my door. I hastened to it and found it locked as usual on the inside. I was afraid to open it. I was horrified. I sprang into my bed and covered my head up in the bedclothes that lay there, more dead than alive, till morning. It would be vain my attempting to tell you the horror with which, even now, I recall the occurrence of that night. It was no such transitory terror as a dream leaves behind it. It seemed to deepen by time and communicated itself to the room and the very furniture that had encompassed the apparition. I could not bear next day to be alone for a moment, just like when you were a kid. I should have told Papa, but for 2 opposite reasons. At one time I thought he would laugh at my story, and I could not bear it being treated as a jest. At another, I thought he might fancy that I had been attacked by the mysterious complaint which had invaded our neighborhood. I had myself no misgivings of the kind, and felt that there was no need to alarm him. I was comfortable enough with my good-natured companions, Madame Perrodon and the vivacious Mademoiselle de la Fontaine. They both perceived that I was out of spirits and nervous, and at length I told them what lay so heavy at my heart. Mademoiselle laughed, but I fancied that Madame Perrodon looked anxious. By the by, the long lime tree walk behind Carmilla's bedroom window is haunted. Nonsense, who tells that story, my dear? Martin says that he came up twice when the old yard gate was being repaired before sunrise, and thrice saw the same female figure walking down the lime tree avenue. So he well might, as long as there are cows to milk in the river fields. I dare say, but Martin chose to be frightened, and never did I see fool more frightened. You must not say a word about it to Carmilla, because she can see down that walk from her room window, and she is, if possible, a greater coward than I. Carmilla came down rather later than usual that day. I was so frightened last night, and I'm sure I should have seen something dreadful if it had not been for that charm I bought from the poor little hunchback whom I had called such hard names. I had a dream of something black coming around my bed, and I woke in such a perfect horror that I really thought, for some seconds, I saw a dark figure near the chimney-piece. But I felt under my pillow for my charm, and the moment my fingers touched it, the figure disappeared. Without it, of that I felt certain, something frightful would have made its appearance. She is messing with you. Perhaps it would have throttled me, as it did those poor people we heard of. Well, listen to me. I began and recounted my adventure, at the recital of which she appeared horrified. And had you the charm near you? No, I dropped it into a china vase in the drawing room, but I shall certainly take it with me tonight, as you have so much faith in it. At this distance of time, I cannot tell you or even understand how I overcame my horror so effectually as to lie alone in my room that night. I remember distinctly that I pinned the charm to my pillow. I fell asleep almost immediately and slept even more soundly than usual all night. Next night I passed as well. My sleep was delightfully deep and dreamless. But I wakened with a sense of lassitude and melancholy, which, however, did not exceed a degree that was almost luxurious. Well, I told you so. I had such delightful sleep myself last night. I pinned the charm to the breast of my nightdress. It was too far away the night before. I'm quite sure it was all fancy, except the dreams. I used to think that evil spirits made dreams, but our doctor told me it was no such thing. Only a fever passing by, or some other malady, as they often do. He said, knocks at the door, and not being able to get in, passes on with that alarm. And what do you think the charm is? It has been fumigated or immersed in some drug, and it is an antidote against the malaria. Then it acts only on the body. Certainly, you don't suppose that evil spirits are frightened by bits of ribbon or the perfumes of a druggist's shop. No, these complaints wandering in the air begin by trying the nerves and so infect the brain, but before they can seize upon you, the antidote repels them. That I am sure is what the charm has done for us. It's nothing magical, it is simply natural. I should have been happier if I could have quite agreed with Carmilla, but I did my best, and the impression was a little losing its force. For some nights I slept profoundly, but still every morning I felt the same lassitude and a languor weighed upon me all day. It's the blood loss, babe. I felt myself a changed girl. A strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy that I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly sinking took gentle, and somehow not unwelcome, possession of me. If it was sad, the tone of mind which this induced was also sweet. Whatever it may be, my soul acquiesced in it. I would not admit that I was ill. I would not consent to tell my papa or have the doctor sent for. Carmilla became more devoted to me than ever, and her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. She used to gloat on me with increasing ardor the more my strength and spirits waned. This always shocked me like a momentary glare of insanity. Without knowing it, I was now in a pretty advanced stage of the strangest illness under which mortal ever suffered. There was an unaccountable fascination in its earlier symptoms that more than reconciled me to the incapacitating effect of that stage of the malady. It's one of the most Victorian sentences I've ever read. This fascination increased for a time until it reached a certain point, when gradually a sense of the horrible mingled itself with it, deepening, as you shall hear, until it discolored and perverted the whole state of my life. The first change I experienced was rather agreeable. It was very near the turning point from which began the descent of Avernus. Certain vague and strange sensations visited me in my sleep. The prevailing one was of that pleasant, peculiar cold thrill which we feel in bathing when we move against the current of a river. This was soon accompanied by dreams that seemed interminable and were so vague that I could never recollect their scenery and persons, or any one connected portion of their action, but they left an awful impression and a sense of exhaustion, as if I had passed through a long period of great mental exertion and danger. After all these dreams, there remained on waking a remembrance of having been in a place very nearly dark, and of having spoken to people whom I could not see, and especially of one clear voice of a female's, very deep, and it spoke as if at a distance, slowly, and producing always the same sensation of indescribable solemnity and fear. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly across my cheek and neck. Sometimes it came as if a warm lips kissed me, and longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat, but there the caress fixed itself. My heart beat faster, my breathing rose and fell rapidly and full drawn. A sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation supervened and turned into a dreadful convulsion, which my senses left me, and I became unconscious. It was now 3 weeks since the commencement of this unaccountable state. My sufferings had, during the last week, told upon my appearance. I had grown pale, my eyes were dilated and darkened underneath, and the languor which I had long felt began to display itself in my countenance. My father asked me often whether I was ill, but with an obstinacy which now seemed to me unaccountable, I persisted in assuring him that I was quite well. In a sense, this was true. I had no pain. I could complain of no bodily derangement. My complaint seemed to be one of the imagination or the nerves, and horrible as my sufferings were, I kept them with a morbid reserve, very nearly to myself. It could not be that terrible complaint which the peasants called the opium, for I had been suffering for 3 weeks, and they were seldom ill for much more than 3 days, when death put an end to their miseries. Okay, so she's only taking a little blood at a time from Laura. Carmilla complained of dreams and feverish sensations, but by no means of so alarming a kind as mine. I say that mine were extremely alarming. Had I been capable of comprehending my condition, I would have invoked aid and advice on my knees. Second, gotta take a drink. I'm going to tell you now of a dream that immediately led to an odd discovery. The narcotic of an unsuspected influence was acting upon me, and my perceptions were benumbed. One night, instead of the voice I was accustomed to hear in the dark, I heard one, sweet and tender, at the same time terrible, which said, "Your mother warns you, beware the assassin." Oh dear. At the same time a light sprang up, and I saw Carmilla standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet in one great stain of blood. I awakened with a shriek, possessed with the one idea that Carmilla was being murdered. I remember springing from my bed, and my next recollection is that of standing on the lobby, crying for help. Madame and Mademoiselle came scurrying out of their rooms in alarm. A lamp burned always in the lobby, and seeing me, they soon learned the cause of my terror. I insisted on our knocking at Carmilla's door. Our knocking was unanswered. It soon became a pounding and an uproar. We shrieked her name, but all was in vain. We all grew frightened, for the door was locked. We hurried back in panic to my room. There we rang the bell, long and furiously. If my father's room had been at the side of the house, he would have called them up at once to our aid. We would call them at once to our aid, but alas, he was quite out of hearing, and to reach him involved an excursion for which none of us had courage. Servants, however, soon came running up the stairs. I had got on my dressing gown and slippers meanwhile, and my companions were already similarly furnished. Recognizing the voices of the servants in the lobby, we sallied out together, and having renewed, as fruitlessly, our summons at Carmilla's door, I ordered the men to force the lock. They did so, and we stood, holding our lights aloft in the doorway, and so stared into the room. We called her by name, but there was still no reply. We looked round the room. Everything was undisturbed. It was exactly in the state in which I had left it on bidding her good night. But Carmilla was gone. Well, she's out on the town getting herself a little drink. At sight of the room, perfectly undisturbed except for our violent entrance, we began to cool a little, and soon recovered our senses sufficiently to dismiss the men. It had struck Mademoiselle that possibly Carmilla had been wakened by the uproar at her door, and in her first panic had jumped from her bed and hid herself in a press, or behind a curtain, from which she could not, of course, emerge until the major domo and his myrmidons had withdrawn. We now recommenced our search and began to call her name again. It was all to no purpose. Our perplexity and agitation increased. We examined the windows, but they were secured. I implored of Carmilla, if she had concealed herself, to play this cruel trick no longer, to come out and to end our anxieties. It was all useless. I was by this time convinced that she was not in the room, nor in the dressing room, the door of which was still locked on this side. She could not have passed it. I was utterly puzzled. Had Carmilla discovered one of the secret passages which the old housekeeper said were known to exist in the Schloss, although the tradition of their exact situation had been lost? A little time would, no doubt, explain all, utterly perplexed as for the present we were. It was past 4 o'clock, and I preferred passing the remaining hours of darkness in Madame's room. Daylight brought no solution of the difficulty. The whole household, with my father at its head, was in a state of agitation next morning. Every part of the chateau was searched, the grounds were explored, no trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The stream was about to be dragged, my father was in distraction. What a tale to have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return! I, too, was almost beside myself, though my grief was of quite of a different kind. The morning was passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock, and still no tidings. I ran up to Carmilla's room and found her standing by the bed. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her with her pretty finger in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in an ecstasy of joy. I kissed and embraced her again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently to bring others to the spot who might at once relieve my father's anxiety. Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? We've been in agonies of anxiety about you. Where have you been? How did you come back? Last night has been a night of wonders. For mercy's sake, explain all you can. It was past 2 last night when I went to sleep as usual in my bed, with my doors locked, that of the dressing room and that opening upon the gallery. My sleep was uninterrupted, so far as I know, dreamless. But I woke just now on the sofa in the dressing room there, and I found the door between the rooms open and the other door forced. How could all this have happened without my being wakened? It must have been accompanied with a great deal of noise, and I am particularly easily wakened. And how could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep having been interrupted, I whom the slightest stir startles? By this time, Madame, Mademoiselle, my father, and a number of the servants were in the room. Carmilla was, of course, overwhelmed with inquiries, congratulations, and welcomes. She had but one story to tell, and seemed the least able of all the parties to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. Ah, the old "I don't remember anything." My father took a turn up and down the room, thinking. I saw Carmilla's eyes follow him for a moment with a sly, dark glance. And my father. Fuck. Damn it, I missed it. It's not letting me. It's not letting me do it. Heck. Okay. There being no one now in the room with Carmilla except my father, Madame, and myself, he came to her thoughtfully, took her hand very kindly, led her to the sofa, and sat down beside her. Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture and ask a question? Who can have a better right? Ask what you please, and I will tell you everything, but my story is simply one of bewilderment and darkness. I know absolutely nothing. Put any question you please, but you know, of course, the limitations Mamma has placed me under. Perfectly, my dear child, I need not approach the topics on which he desires our silence. Now, the marvel of the last night consists in your having been removed from your bed and your room without being wakened, and this removal having occurred apparently while the windows were still secured and the 2 doors locked upon the inside. I will tell you my theory and ask you a question. Carmilla was leaning on her hand dejectedly. Madam and I were listening breathlessly. Now my question is this. Have you ever been suspected of walking in your sleep? Never, since I was very young indeed. But you did walk in your sleep when you were young. Yes, I know I did. I've been told so often by my old nurse. Well, what has happened is this. You got up in your sleep, unlocked the door, not leaving the key as usual in the lock, but taking it out and locking it on the outside. You again took the key out and carried it away with you to some one of 25 rooms on this floor, or perhaps upstairs or downstairs. There are so many rooms and closets, so much heavy furniture, and such accumulations of lumber that it would require a week to search this old house thoroughly. Do you see now what I mean? I do, but not well. And how, Papa, do you account for her finding herself on the sofa in the dressing room, which we had searched so carefully? She came there after you had searched it, still in her sleep, and at last woke spontaneously, and was as much surprised to find herself where she was as anyone else. I wish all mysteries were as easily and innocently explained as yours, Carmilla. And so we may congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, and no tampering with locks. No burglars or poisoners or witches, nothing that need alarm Carmilla or anyone else for our safety. Carmilla was looking charmingly. Nothing could be more beautiful than her tints. She's just happy she got away with it. Her beauty was, I think, enhanced by that graceful languor that was peculiar to her. I think my father was silently contrasting her looks with mine. I wish my poor Laura was looking more like herself. So our alarms were happily ended, and Carmilla restored to her friends. And her food. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, my father arranged that a servant should sleep outside her door, so that she would not attempt to make another such excursion without being arrested at her own door. That night passed quietly, and next morning early, the doctor, whom my father had sent for without telling me a word about it, arrived to see me. Madame accompanied me to the library, and there the grave little doctor with white hair and spectacles, whom I mentioned before, was waiting to receive me. Gotta take another drink. We were standing, he and I, in the recesses of one of the windows, facing one another. I told him my story, and as I proceeded, he grew graver and graver. When my statement was over, he leaned with his shoulders against the wall, and with his eyes fixed on me earnestly, with an interest in which was a dash of horror. After a minute's reflection, he asked Madam if he could see my father. He was sent for accordingly, and as he entered smiling, he said, "I dare say, Doctor, you're going to tell me that I'm an old fool for having brought you here. I hope I am." But his smile faded into shadow as the doctor, with a very grave face, beckoned to him. He and the doctor talked for some time in the same recess where I had just conferred with the physician. It seemed an earnest and argumentative conversation. The room is very large, and I and Madame stood together, burning with curiosity, at the farther end. Not a word could we hear, however, for they spoke in a very low tone, and the deep recess of the window quite concealed the doctor from view. My father was also barely displaying a foot, arm, and shoulder, and the voices were all less audible for the sort of closet which the thick wall and window formed. After a time, my father's face looked into the room. It was pale, thoughtful, and I fancied agitated. "Laura, dear, come here for a moment. Madam, we shan't trouble you, the doctor says at present." Accordingly, I approached, for the first time a little alarmed, for although I felt very weak, I did not feel ill, and strength, one always fancies, is a thing that may be picked up when we please. My father held out his hand to me as I drew near, but he was looking at the doctor. "It certainly is very odd. I don't understand it quite. Laura, come here, dear. Now attend to Dr. Spielsberg and recollect yourself. You mentioned a sensation like that of two needles piercing the skin, somewhere about your neck, on the night when you experienced your first horrible dream. Is there still any soreness?" "None at all." "Can you indicate with your finger about the point at which you think this occurred?" very little below my throat, here. I wore a morning dress which covered the place I pointed to. Now you can satisfy yourself. You won't mind your papa's lowering your dress a very little, as necessary to detect a symptom of the complaint under which you have been suffering. I acquiesced. It was only an inch or two below the edge of my collar. God bless me, so it is. See it now with your own eyes. What is it? Nothing, my dear young lady, but a small blue spot about the size of the tip of your little finger. And now the question is, what is best to be done? Is there any danger? I trust not, my dear. I don't see why you should not recover. I don't see why you should not begin immediately to get better. That is the point at which the sense of strangulation begins? Yes. And recollect as well as you can, the same point was some kind of center of that thrill which you described just now, like the current of a cold stream running against you. It may have been, I think it was. Ah, you see, shall I say a word to Madame? Certainly. I find my young friend here far from well. It won't be of any great consequence, I hope. Ah, fuck. In the meantime, Madame, you will be so good as to not let Miss Laura be alone for one moment. That is the only direction I need give for the present. It is indispensable. We may rely upon your kindness, Madame, I know it. Of course. And you, dear Laura, I know you will observe the doctor's direction. I shall have to ask your opinion upon another patient whose symptoms slightly resemble those of my daughter that have just been detailed to you, very much milder in degree, but I believe quite of the same sort. She is a young lady, our guest, but as you say, you will be passing this way again this evening. You can't do better than take your supper here, and then you can then see her. She does not come down till the afternoon. I thank you. I shall be with you then at about 7 this evening. And then they repeated their directions to me and to Madame, and with this parting charge, my father left us and walked out with the doctor. I saw them pacing together up and down between the road and the moat on the grassy platform in front of the castle, evidently absorbed in their earnest conversation. The doctor did not return. I saw him mount his horse there, take his leave, and ride away eastward through the forest. Nearly at the same time, I saw the man arrive from Dranfield with the letters and dismount and hand them back to my father. In the meantime, Madame and I were both busy, lost in conjecture as to the reasons of the singular and earnest direction which the doctor and my father had concurred in imposing. Madame, as she afterwards told me, was afraid the doctor apprehended a sudden seizure, and that without prompt assistance I might either lose my life in a fit, or at least be seriously hurt. The interpretation did not strike me, and I fancied, perhaps luckily for my nerves, that the arrangement was prescribed simply to secure a companion, who would prevent my taking too much exercise, or eating unripe fruit, or doing any of the 50 foolish things to which young people are supposed to be prone. About half an hour after my father came in, he had a letter in his hand, and said, Half an hour after my father came in, he had a letter in his hand, and said, This letter has been delayed. It is from General Spielsdorf. He might have been here yesterday. He may not come till tomorrow, or it may be here today. He put the open letter into my hand, but he did not look pleased, as he used when a guest, especially one so much beloved as the General, was coming. Okay, so the General let someone into his house, and then his daughter died. Or his ward, who he considered a daughter, his adoptive daughter. So, on the contrary, he looked as if he wished him at the bottom of the Red Sea. There was plainly something on his mind which he did not choose to divulge. Papa, darling, will you tell me this? Perhaps. Does the doctor think me very ill? No, dear. Sally, what are you doing? Oh, checking on my dog. No, dear, he thinks if right steps are taken, you will be quite well again, at least on the high road to a complete recovery in a day or two. I wish our good friend the General had chosen any other time. That is, I wish you had been perfectly well to receive him. But do tell me, Papa, what does he think is the matter with me? Nothing. You must not plague me with questions. He answered with more irritation than I ever remember him to have displayed before, and seeing that I looked wounded, I suppose, he kissed me and added, She'll know all about it in a day or two. That is, all that I know. In the meantime, you are not to trouble your head about it. He turned and left the room, but came back before I had done wondering and puzzling over the oddity of all this. It was merely to say that he was going to Karnstein, and had ordered the carriage to be ready at 12, and that I and Madame should accompany him. He was going to see the priest who lived near those picturesque grounds upon business, and as Carmilla had never seen them, she should follow when she came down with Mademoiselle, who would bring materials for what you would call a picnic, which might be laid out for us in the ruined castle. Well, that's nice. I wish I could go for picnics in ruined castles. At 12 o'clock, accordingly, I was ready, and not long after, my father, Madame, and I set out upon our projected drive. Passing the drawbridge, we turned to the right and followed the road over the steep Gothic bridge westward to reach the deserted village and ruined castle of Karnstein. No sylvan drive can be fancied prettier. The ground breaks into gentle hills and hollows, all clothed with beautiful wood, totally destitute of the comparative formality which artificial planting and early culture and pruning impart. The irregularities of the ground often lead the road out of its course and cause it to wind beautifully around the sides of broken hollows and the steeper sides of the hills among varieties of ground almost inexhaustible. Turning one of these points, we suddenly encountered our old friend, the general, riding toward us, attended by a mounted servant. His portmanteaus were following in a hired wagon, such as we term a cart. The general dismounted as we pulled up, and after the usual greetings, was easily persuaded to accept the vacant seat in the carriage and send his horse on with his servant to the schloss. Chapter 4. The Story. So he's gonna tell them what happened to his daughter, probably. Okay, hold on. Okay, it is 6 p.m. I've been reading this for like a straight 2 hours. I want to save here. There we go. Okay, it has the notes. Ooh. Okay, it has notes on all of the stuff it has mentioned in here. That's cool. Okay, I'm gonna have to read those next time. Right, I don't know if anyone's still there, but it is 6, so I gotta head out now. My throat is getting sore from all this reading out loud. I do not talk very much in my regular day-to-day life, and so reading a whole ass visual novel, a Victorian visual novel, is kind of killing me. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow with more of this. I'm really liking the story. It's definitely very classic vampire horror. Got a bunch of stuff coming together that you feel like the people in the story should realize, but you also kind of think, what if you were in that situation, you may not have thought of things the same as an outside observer. You know what I mean. Anyway, instead of rambling with my scratchy voice, I'm gonna sign off and go do some other stuff until tonight for the art stream. Okay, goodbye.